Labour have won the general election by a landslide, a huge majority. So what does that mean for tenants and property investors and landlords? We're going to take a look. My name's Neil Harding and welcome to Property Inside.
Hi, my name's Mark Ashworth. Why don't we just have a quick chat about the way the voting went? I mean, I think there's going to be literally hundreds of videos from lots of different industries all talking about how it's going to affect them. And I don't think that property investors and tenants are any different. So let's just have a chat through what's happened,
What did the electorate do? I mean, so it's currently, at the time of recording, it's the morning of the 5th of July, the day after the election. So not all of the results are declared yet. There are still 2 seats to be declared, but it's really interesting. I've got some statistics here. At the moment, Labour have got 412 seats,
Phenomenal.
a huge majority. Conservatives 121, Lib Dem 71, Scottish National Party 9, Sinn Féin 7, Independent 6. I'm not going to go through every single one. Democratic Unionist Party 5, Reform 4, Green 4. I'll stop there. There are several others. However, what was really interesting to me when I was looking at these statistics is the sort of anomalies within this. So what jumped off the page to me was Liberal Democrats have got 71 MPs. Congratulations to Lib Democrats. That's a huge turnaround for them. So an increase of 63 seats compared with where they were before in the previous election. 3.5 million people voted for Lib Dem. If you look at, let's say, Reform, they have 4 MPs and 4.1 million people voted for them. So just seems like such an anomaly. And of course, that's constituency politics at the end of the day, because that's the way the country is divided up. And there's a map drawn. And people vote for who they vote for. That's it. So
I don't think most people would really be aware of that. Because the news is essentially just telling people how many seats each party has got, not necessarily how many people voted for them. So the fact that more people have voted for Reform, considering how long Nigel's been on board with them, what's it, 6 weeks or? Yeah, crazy.
Something like that, isn't it? So Reform got 14% of the total electorate vote, 14.3%. And I don't know, let's just compare that with Conservatives, let's say. They got 19, just under 20%, 19 point, no, sorry, that's the share change. So the share percentage vote was 23.7%. So 23.7% of the electorate voted for Conservative. They've got 121 MPs. And also another interesting stat is the number of people that voted for Labour didn't actually really change that much.
Right.
So their share change increased by 1% compared with the previous election. But this time they've got another 211 seats. I just think it's incredible.
Very, very interesting. Well, I mean, obviously it's politics, right? And we try not to talk too much about politics on this channel, but obviously with all that's going on, we really don't have any choice but to have some kind of conversation. So, Neil, you been up all night looking at reading the whole of the Labour Manifesto to pull out all of the property related stuff for both landlords and for tenants, because obviously what affects tenants ultimately affects landlords as well. We've got some information around the manifesto, just with the details about how they may be looking to impact the property market. So let's just have a look through that and we'll just have a bit of a discussion. So the first point on the list is reforming the planning system, reinstating local targets to help build 1.5 million new homes. Now, for the last, I can't even remember how many years, but it seems like infinite, where the government has promised to build, 300,000 properties per year, and they've never ever met that target, which is partly the reason why we've got such a disparity in supply and demand across the whole market. Well, all markets, I would say, probably. 1.5 million sounds like a massive number, but of course over 5 years that of course is 300,000 per year.
Well, as an ambition goes, it's exactly what the Conservatives wanted to achieve, 300,000 a year. 1.5 million sounds like a much more impressive number, doesn't it? I think towards the very end of the Conservatives' manifesto, they actually bumped the number up slightly. So I think their ambition became slightly higher, but their previous target to that was 300,000. It would be great, I think, if Labour achieve that. I hope they do. I think it remains to be seen. I'm not sure if there have been any, or not very many governments that have actually achieved their house building targets over the last 40, 50 years for that matter.
I mean, for as long as I've been invested in property, every single expert or guru in the industry has always said that we're a small island and we never meet demand for housing. So, you know, I think that remains, as you say, it remains to be seen.
The planning reform point is an interesting one. I think a lot of property developers feel as though planning does need to be reformed with certainty on exactly what is going to get planning permission and what isn't, so that you can actually invest with certainty, and that creates economic activity and growth. That will help build houses and achieve those targets.
I agree.
There's not a huge amount of detail though how they'll do that.
Moving on to building a new generation of new towns, fast track the approval of brownfield sites. I mean, this is the planning reform that we're talking about. Release some low quality green belt for housing. There is plenty of room in the UK for new housing. Obviously, if it's on your doorstep, I appreciate that local communities don't necessarily want it on their doorstep. We have an enormous site just at the end of our road here, which they've been supposedly trying to build houses on for, I don't know when they started on it, 3 years ago. They put some infrastructure in, but that's it. I understand that it has to go somewhere, and we desperately need housing in the UK. But new towns might be good. We've got some over the other side of Cambridge. North Stow's one that springs to mind. Obviously, a few years ago, Camborne, Lower Camborne, Great Camborne, those areas were essentially built from scratch. And they're full, aren't they? I mean, you know, people are still desperate to get into places like that. Back in the 70s, there was Bar Hill. I think that was created from scratch in the 70s. I think that's good, and if they do meet that target, that will be, you know, I think welcomed by lots of people. Prioritising building of social rented homes. Of course, you know, back in the day after the war and whatnot, we had a whole host of building across the whole of the UK with local authority properties, which obviously Margaret Thatcher agreed to sell to the occupiers at a discount. It would be nice to see the local governments, or having a higher number of properties to be able to rent social housing. Introducing a permanent mortgage guarantee scheme. This is an interesting one for first-time buyers.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see the detail on that as well. I mean, it makes a great headline, and it perhaps attracts some votes. There'll be people that see the detail of that and think it's great, and there'll be people that see the detail of that when it comes out and think, this is a trap. You know, it doesn't change the fact that either you can afford a mortgage or you can't. If it's guaranteed by somebody else, then perhaps if it's underwritten by a central bank or government, then perhaps the access to borrowing becomes more readily available, but that doesn't change the fact that it needs to be affordable.
We've spoken about this on the channel before. We know there's the leasehold reform bill which has been passed, and they're talking about making it easier for people to extend those leases and ban new leasehold flats, etc. I think that's pretty much underway, isn't it? Ground rent charges, I think, are still to be finalised, or I think that was missed out of the last bill.
Yeah, it was excluded in the end.
Which I think eventually they will probably do something with that, so that's good news. The whole no-fault evictions thing is still in the air, because the banning of the Section 21 was cancelled effectively when the election was announced.
Yeah, Parliament was dissolved, and effectively then nothing could happen with it. So.
Yep, we think that they will definitely ban Section 21, and
Looks
hopefully
likely.
They'll reform Section 8, or they'll introduce something else. The Labour manifesto doesn't include a reference to rent controls, but it does say that they will empower renters to challenge unreasonable rent increases. Personally, I don't think rent increases happen that are unreasonable unless people are genuinely stuck in that property. So let's say that on paper they can't necessarily afford anywhere else. They're stuck in that property, and if the landlord tries to increase those rents in an unfair way, then that would certainly be something that I would be looking to prevent as a good landlord, let's say. I think a lot of these rules tend to be bent by people that are unscrupulous. I think people that are genuinely good people and want to provide good quality homes for people, I don't think they're going to do things that are unreasonable. I think generally people will want to stay within what is considered to be a fair market rent in general. So I think that's a good thing. Labour proposed an amendment to the Renters Reform Bill that will have withdrawn the power of the first tier tribunal to decide that rent should be higher than the rent requested by the landlord in their Section 13 notice.
Yeah, currently, if a tenant, so the process at the moment, when a landlord looks to increase rent through a Section 13 notice, that's the process. If the tenant doesn't agree with the proposed rent under that Section 13 notice, they can go to a tribunal and object and appeal, effectively. And that tribunal's job is to decide whether or not that market rent is fair, whether the increase is fair. And although the tenant's expectation might be that it's not fair and it needs to be less than that, there is at the moment, there is the possibility at least that from that tribunal, the rent is even higher, because they might decide, well, actually, the landlord was proposing not only a fair rent, but it's below market rent. And so my job is to say what I think market rent is, and therefore the rent's going to be even higher than that. And that, I think, is probably acting for many as a deterrent for tenants to go to the tribunal service. So Labour's proposal was that increase in rent can't happen. It can only be either, yes, we agree with the proposal, or no, it's less than that. So it's probably going to be something put more in favour of the tenant. And actually, I agree with this proposal. I think it's fine, because the landlord's already proposed what the rent is. So, you know, they're happy with that rent. That's why they put it in their Section 13 notice. They're not asking for more. So why would the tribunal service go higher, you know?
So let's just be clear. So if the tribunal service is engaged and they say that the rent is fair market rent is higher, that doesn't mean that the landlord has to charge that higher rent, does it?
I suppose not. I suppose they could say, no, I'm not doing that. They could always come to an agreement with the tenant. You're right. I'm sure that would be possible.
Anyway, so I mean, I think that's a good thing as well. I would agree with you. I don't know that there are many rent increases that are taken to tribunal. I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here.
Anecdotally, I've never heard of any.
No, and you know, we've been in the game for a fair amount of time, and I certainly don't know of any other fellow landlords that have. But of course, mention in the comments below if you have, or if you have seen that either as a tenant or as a landlord. So just another point, EPCs, they rear their ugly heads yet again. Labour to appear to revive the debate. Although they don't mention EPC rating requirements specifically, they say in the manifesto that they will ensure homes in the private rented sector meet minimum energy efficiency standards by 2030, saving renters hundreds of pounds per year. Nobody will be forced to rip out their boiler as a result of our plans. Again, remains to be seen. I think that's probably not on their list of priorities at the minute. I think they've probably got a bigger fish to fry, right? Labour manifesto does not refer to the following provisions that were in the Renters Reform Bill. So abolishing fixed-term tenancies and making periodic tenancies compulsory, the implied right for a tenant to have a pet, a new PRS ombudsman, National Register of Landlords, or a database of some kind, and new grounds for possession under Section 8.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mention any of that stuff.
Doesn't mention any of those things. That's not to say, of course, that they might not actually decide to do those things. They might, but it doesn't specifically say that, for example, there will be an ombudsman or there will be a landlord's register.
I mean, I do think that the general news has been that the manifesto, the Labour's manifesto in particular, has been what's been described as thin, meaning that it doesn't really hold any detail. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'm not sure. Many manifestos that governments and parties tend to put out there, they don't tend to stick to them anyway. So largely how that looks and how it's going to look, I think is...
It's a really good point. It's probably as part of the closing comment is, it's a manifesto. It's just a suggestion. Really it's just a promise. It's just a guidance, isn't it? It's they're basically going to do something at least slightly different to what they've actually put in their manifesto. Anyway, probably. It tends to be the case.
So the general comments really for investors and tenants and what is it? Keep calm and carry on? I don't know.
I think it's probably on the housing policy side of things. If anything, it's one that you look at and think it's probably designed to favour the tenant rights rather than the landlord rights. It's probably weighted that way. And that's not to say that therefore this is definitely bad news for landlords. I don't think it's necessarily a win-lose or lose-win equation. I think that it is possible that good things for tenants can mean good things for landlords as well. I think this is definitely designed to appeal to the renter voter. I think probably the first thing that they will move on is the Section 21. I think that's going to go back to Parliament very quickly. I think Angela Rayner has said that within the first 100 days of coming to government, they will make that happen. In reality, it's going to take at least a year. It's going to have to go through the whole cycle all over again. It's going to have to go back to the first reading, back to second reading. There'll be an opportunity for amendments, consultations, etc. So that's going to be another thing that we'll be talking about in 2025.
Gives us some content to record anyway.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we do hope that you found that insightful, listening to our comments on the new Labour government that we now have. If you would like to make any comments, please do below. And of course, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you next time.